Hello everyone and welcome back. Today, we're diving into the 6th episode of our story where after the 4th Shinobi War and Naruto's battles with Sasuke and Madara, something restarted his life and they all went back, only they never remembered what happened. He lives a different life with parents he doesn't remember being without. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel after watching the video. Let's get started. Dog tags were used in military services as a form of identification. They were markers of sorts, and, hopefully, adequate enough way of recognizing the owners. However, those tags were never simple ones in theory. Though they were made out to be mass-produced and straightforward, the concept always had that deeper, darker meaning. They had a clearly twisted way of reminding shinobi just how serious their occupation was from the day they signed up for it. In a sense, dog tags were symbols of those shinobi would lose and those they had lost. On a corpse at least, they branded the dead. Kitoko was a kunoichi who was all too aware of that fact. She fingered the shiny metal dog tag that dangled from her neck. It clinked slightly against the second one she also wore that had the name of her deceased fiancé etched onto its surface. His name felt cold on the pad of her thumb and she rubbed the metal in a continuous and intrinsic habit. Carved there was the eternal reminder that Ryu Goto was in fact dead and had disappeared from the world completely about 12 years previously on that night. That night 12 years ago. That night when the fox attacked their home and destroyed not only lives, but families as well. The woman walked with her curly dark hair dancing back and forth as it brushed against the forest green of her jounin vest. She tucked the chain that held the tags on it back under her mesh undershirt and continued on her way. To some, Kitoko would be a forgettable person with a forgettable personality, but that was only because she willed it to be so. She did not want to be noticed. She did not want to be bothered. In fact, it was probably better for everyone if she just blended into the background and barely existed. That way, she would not have to see that boy and look at him and see her old teammate, that boy's father, and feel the overwhelming guilt settle in the pit of her stomach. Yet, Kitoko was not always that way. She used to be a vibrant person that would smile widely and make playful remarks to her friends. She was kind and thoughtful, the kind of person who would come up to someone and offer a hello simply for the reason that they appeared lonely. She used to be openly creative, which was probably the reason she was such a talented genjutsu specialist, but creative in the sense that she used to paint and draw for others as birthday gifts. The kunoichi she used to be was a loving one who was giving and lively when spoken to. Her heart was large and she was willing to share it. But then, 12 years ago, that one event changed it all. So she became seemingly cold and distant towards others. She remained respectful and obedient, but she never went out in public as often as her friends would have liked. However, nothing could change it because Ryu was dead now and nothing and no one could bring the dead back to life. But her heart stayed the same. Kitoko never loved too little, she loved too much. You see, she could even acknowledge the person who contained her loved one's killer. As much as she detested that creature, that monster that was the nine-tailed fox, she could not bring herself to hate Naruto. Yet she could not bring herself to love him just for who he was, a mere child, either. Perhaps the turmoil was made more difficult because of the fact that she was one of the few people that knew her old teammate who happened to be her fourth Hokage, was going to have a child at that time. She had not known the exact identity of the boy, nor what his gender would be, nor even his name or the target birth date. Things like that were kept a secret outside a certain group for obvious reasons, but she and Ryu, who had been teammates to Minato, were part of the handful that knew that he was to have a kid in the first place. She remembered how absolutely honored and excited Ryu had been. "Can you believe that our little squirt is going to have a mini squirt soon?" he had bellowed happily, practically skipping on his feet. Kitoko remembered it clearly how he profusely congratulated Minato and slapped the grinning man on the back while he laughed. Ryu loved kids and if he had it his way, he would have corrupted the child as Minato had used to call it jokingly. Kitoko almost shuddered at the thought of Minato also losing his life that night as he had originally planned. Then she would never know the name of that child he was supposed to have. She would be alone without either of her best childhood friends. She closed her hazel eyes, resigned and partially terrified at the idea that she may have been too weak in her heart to live in the village any longer if it meant living with that boy who would probably be prancing around without a care and with no parents to guide him and possibly no lead to his true identity. She may have only seen Naruto as more of the demon than the boy for killing both her fiancé and her friend if she never knew who he was and why. But regardless, that did not make things any easier as she watched Naruto then, her gaze following him as he stood up straighter, his spine snapped taut in front of the Hokage's desk. "Here is your mission scroll, Team 7, she heard the voice of her former teammate state with that authoritative tone of his as she gently pushed open the door and stepped into the room and waited patiently for her turn to make a report. The brunette woman watched as Kakashi Hatake nodded at his sensei and took the scroll in his gloved palms, carefully patting the item into his back weapons pouch. He and his team appeared to be packed for a mission that would take at least a week. The Genin's forms were ready and their stances wide and strong as if they were prepared for something like that the whole of their short lives. For a second, it made her think of the days when she, Ryu, and Minato were all on Jiraiya Sensei's team during the Third War before Minato was apprenticed by their teacher. "I expect that this mission will take about a week, but I will give you a few days leeway just in case there are traveling issues as always," the Yondaime informed the Genin cell. "It should be a simple Siranxo," and Kotoko noticed the meaningful look the man gave his son. "Do not go looking for trouble when there won't be any." She saw how the smaller blonde rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment. "I'm sure they can handle escort," Kakashi said after he performed an once-over on the three shifting young ninja. Kotoko moved slightly forward, subtly entranced with the look on Minato's face as he replied with "Oh, I know they can do it," and then he smirked and he was suddenly glowing with only the kind of pride any man who was a father could exude. "You'll do fine." From that last line alone, she knew that he was especially talking to Naruto, who had suddenly seemed nervous at the prospect of finally leaving his home for a job. The woman observed how Naruto seemed oddly sheepish and she could almost see the soft smile that showed up on his face like a slow-growing brightness of a star, and he bowed his head with a whispered, "Yeah." The genjutsu specialist felt that guilt take over her gut again, like ivy would as it wrapped around her middle in twists and turns to strangle her. She had a desperate urge to touch the extra dog tag again just to feel Ryu's name, Ryu's presence in the room. And then the shame, the tremendous, overpowering feeling, encased her in its arms as she witnessed that boy travel out of the office with a grin over his shoulder to his father and an enthusiastic reply to something one of his teammates had said. Minato's stare lingered on Naruto slightly longer than on the others as they exited, and the guilt festered deeper. But then that terrible emotion solidified as Naruto turned around, a joyful beam on his face, and he greeted her with the single statement that made her crumble on the inside because she could not bring herself to fully care for someone that contained the thing that had killed her loved one, even though she knew in her gut that he was so innocent and not at all evil. "See you later, Kotoko-san." And the bouncing blonde was out the door in a flourish, but she never responded to him. She barely even spoke to him because her fingers trembled every time she did. In her heart, she wanted to be able to say something to Naruto as well, if not for her former teammate's sake, but for Ryu's, but instead she faced her friend as the Hokage and not as a classmate. Kotoko Yagi reporting from a successful B-rank mission, Yondaime-sama, she remarked, and Minato looked up at his friend as if seeing her for the first time, but that did not stop her from noticing that bittersweet sadness in his eyes as he let his stare flicker back to the retreating backs of Team 7 for a single second before coming back to her. "I'm glad to hear it," the leader replied, and it was back to official business like nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. There was no mistaking it. Even as the woman made her report, recounting how she had defeated the enemy missing Nin from stealing the valuable golden treasure from the Fire Daimyo's palace, she felt the persistent shame in the back of her mind. She and Ryu had always known from the moment that they met Minato Namikaze that he was no idiot, and even Jiraiya had known that the man would go places. He was the prodigy of their generation and was incredibly intelligent and shrewd. But he had this one aspect of his personality that both he and Kushina shared: he could make anyone want to listen to him. Things like that made someone observant. So Kotoko knew inherently that even though the two had maintained their friendship throughout the years, even with the loss of their third team member, that he was always watching her closely whenever she was around his son. And this was all because she knew that Minato Namikaze was not stupid. The guilt would always trouble her because Minato discerned that she feared his only son and Ryu would be so disappointed in her. Team 7 walked as a group down the dirt road surrounded by the typical forests that enveloped the land of fire. The heat was sweltering in the summer air, and each of them could adequately feel the heat seeping into their clothing like a furnace would if it slow cooked their skin. The dampness of sweat already started to soak into the fabrics. Just a bit over a day into their mission, the group was just a handful of kilometers away from the sprawling farming village of Mie, which sat to the northeast of Konoha just near the border of Fire Country on the side of the land of rice paddies. They were on the way to the Ueda family merchant house. 1. It was a budding business that had only started just less than 5 years previously, but their success was well known throughout the small country because of their ability to trade quality rice, starches, and farming supplies. Not to mention that they were practically becoming legendary with their homemade rice cakes that many were praising highly, and the fire daimyo was hard-pressed to try some of his own. The terrain was evening out and the trees of the Konoha ninjas' homeland were disappearing behind them, allowing the sun's rays to come crashing down in waves through the little shade covering them. Naruto had even changed out of his normal black and orange jacket because of its long sleeves and instead opted for wearing an alternative set of clothes. He wore a russet orange shirt underneath a light gray zipped-up vest with a hood and the Uzumaki swirl patched onto the back. His pants were made of the typical Shinobi-style material, but they were dark gray so that they complemented the lighter color of his vest. The bottoms only reach up to his ankles and were threaded together in the same color of orange as his shirt. Below them he sported his navy Shinobi sandals. Sasuke wore the usual Uchiha fashion with the dark blue shirt and wide collar. The symbol of the police force that consisted of a dark shuriken and the Uchiha red and white fan on top of it was stitched onto one of the sleeves. The pattern was outlined in yellow to show that he was still a member in training. His shorts were long and white and slightly ruffled from the dirt the team had to sleep in. Sakura had on her red dress with the white circle stitched onto the back symbolizing the Haruno family. Underneath were dark short spandex so that she could move freely, and unlike the boys and their sensei who wore their forehead hitaite on their foreheads, she had hers tied securely on the top of her head like a headband. The three of them plopped down next to a slow rushing river when Kakashi had suggested that they take a quick break to fuel up and eat lunch. A low fire started burning over a pile of forest debris. After a few minutes of catching freshwater fish, the group had food being cooked on sticks over the flames, 1 fish per person. Naruto had whipped out a cookware pot out of seemingly nowhere, and when asked he revealed that he was carrying around a storage scroll. Yeah, the blonde stated matter-of-factly to Sakura as he was in the process of fishing out a plastic cup of instant ramen from said scroll, "My dad's not the only fuinjutsu specialist in the village. My mom's actually the one who helped him perfect his seals." At the odd look he received from his female teammate, he added with a grin, "She's been teaching me some." The Uchiha pouted and crossed his arms as he tentatively reached out for one of the fish that appeared cooked enough. "Let me guess," he said with a sideways glance towards his best friend, "you wanted to master the storage seal so that you could bring tons of ramen with you on missions." Naruto scooped clean water from the river into the pot and set it atop the fire, poured the uncooked ramen noodles from the packaging into it, and waited for the contents to boil to the amusement of Kakashi and Sasuke. The boy huffed. After a pause, "You're a jerk, aren't you, Uchiha?" The raven smirked. "I'm just saying the truth out loud," and he bit into his lunch with a satisfied crunch. Moments passed in contented silence as the group quietly munched on their fish while Naruto waited for his ramen to be fully cooked. The noodles took some time to become edible enough to eat, which caused the Bond to start fidgeting and twiddling his thumbs to the immense enjoyment of Sasuke, who was chuckling under his breath. The Namikaze finally sighed and dug out a metal bowl from his scroll after another controlled pump of chakra. The item popped into existence over the paper and he grabbed it enthusiastically, using a set of travel chopsticks to pick up some of the miso-flavored ramen and placed it into his bowl. My favorite kind of food, he let out with a belch. The whole world knows that, teased his friend, and the other two laughed at the playful jab. To Naruto, the ramen was just right, albeit not as amazingly delicious as his mom's or Ichiraku's, but just right in his case. The soup was salty and frothy with a tinge of chicken artificial flavoring, not that he minded. He slurped the noodles up and savored the residual taste on his tongue, all the while ignoring the looks he was getting from his teammates and teacher who were already finishing up their fish or picking their teeth for tidbits of leftover food particles. A second later, he heard Kakashi slap his hands together in a single loud clap. The three genin snapped to attention the best they could, with the exception being Naruto, who continued to eat haphazardly. "Alright, pop quiz," the silver-haired Jounin sang as he crinkled his only visible eye into a smile. The three young ones groaned. The man leaned forward with that annoyingly happy expression covered by his face mask and went on. "What is the political state of the land of rice paddies?" he asked, then he pointed to his students. "Go." "The land of rice paddies is a fairly new country that is only about a decade old," quickly responded Sakura with an apt appearance as she set aside the stick she had eaten from. "The country just got out of a civil war between its ninja clans and was finally united under one daimyo. They currently have no formal allies to speak of because they are still in the process of developing, but because they are neutral, many nations like to trade with them and they allow foreigners in." Kakashi nodded in approval, then lifted dual fingers as if showing them a number 2. "Okay. Now what is the status of their ninja village, if any?" It was the Uchiha who decided to answer this question, and he immediately snapped his head up, to the delight of the fangirl on the team. Because the ninja clans just stopped fighting, their relationships with each other are pretty tentative. Rice Paddies has trained Shinobi, but no village to keep them together, and they are still separated by clan like in the Warring States era. "Right," the Jounin acknowledged. "Any notable customs we should be aware of?" "It's rude to wear hoods when you're walking in the middle of any town there because people still get suspicious," Naruto explained between bites from his food. He chewed a few times and tapped a finger on his chin. "Oh, and it's bad to refuse food from your host too many times, correct," sighed Kakashi. "Though I don't know if the last one was necessary." Sasuke smirked and jabbed a thumb in the direction of his childhood friend. "This idiot here only thinks clearly with his stomach." "Lame, Uchiha," whined Naruto, and Sakura only giggled beside them, happy in simply observing the boys perform their antics. Shaking his head, the teacher just let the boys banter back and forth. He observed them as he took a few steps over to the river in order to refill his canteen with a refreshing batch of water before the man finally came back and patted the friends on the heads and grinned widely behind his mask and letting them know that break time was over, to clean up, and then follow him because they would get the mission going. Nonetheless, it took the team another good hour before they finally reached the border checkpoint. When they did, it was standard protocol. A particularly fat ninja with the crest of some rice paddy clan on his shoulder halted the team at a wire fence that had what looked to be a small, somewhat livable building attached to it. He lazily asked them for their IDs and papers, as well as for their reason for entrance into the foreign country. Kakashi Hatake, the teacher, droned out before any of his students could say a word, "Registration number 009720, and Jounin of the village hidden in the leaves. My genin team and I have been assigned a C-rank escort mission from Mie to Saga for the Ueda family trade group." Nodding, the man gestured over to the three preteens and they stated their names and ID numbers as well. Naruto refrained from using his last name and instead offered only his first name. Luckily, the shinobi did not notice, and Kakashi was grateful that the boy did not forget to practice extra precaution. Though it would not be entirely out of line to state his surname considering that they were in neutral territory, the name Namikaze in and of itself was an infamous one. They did not need to add any more attention to their team, especially with the copy ninja and an Uchiha already on board. So after successfully passing border patrol, the team made their way to the village of Mie, which they reached in record time as it was not far from the border itself. Kakashi was happy with the pace they had and noted that according to the position of the sun it was only about 1,400 hours, 2, in the afternoon. The sun was relatively high in the sky and carriages were being drawn by water buffalo that waded through the crowds lazily. Other water buffalo were being guided through the assorted rice fields that dotted the edges of town as numerous fish swam around their legs and in between the rice stalks. A pair of civilian schoolgirls in uniforms that consisted of gray drab jumper dresses and a collared white blouse underneath passed by Team 7 and giggled at the sight of the boys, an action to which Sakura was very displeased with. Unbeknownst to the girls, both Naruto and Sasuke had spotted the imposing building labeled the Ueda family merchant house in golden kanji to offset the purple tiled roof. They sped by them and the schoolgirls screeched as their gray dresses flipped up and a few people caught a glimpse of their underwear. The gigantic merchant house was the largest building on the block, completely eclipsing the tiny homes and shops with their thatched roofs and purely wooden exteriors with the occasional concrete. The roads were dusty and barrels of either water, rice wine, or sacks of rice grains were being carried throughout the streets. "Here we are," Kakashi stated matter-of-factly. They opened the imposing mahogany doors and a blast of cool air hit them in the face. Inside was a fairly nice lobby with shiny red tiles and handcrafted furniture, if not for all the boxes and containers that were stacked throughout the place. A fat man with a virtually bald head and graying leftover sideburns was directing workers everywhere and leading them to an extravagant bunch of carts somewhere in the front of the building. His silky robes flapped about him like a bird's wings would, and he had a very pointed beard that vaguely reminded the team of a sheepdog. Two others were not working at all. They looked to be their clients' sons that were on file. One was tall and lanky with a pair of oval glasses propped on his crooked nose and a mop of dark hair and dark eyes. He was playing with what looked to be a finger trap contraption, and he had a self-important look to his posture. The teenager to his left was short and stout with spiked brown hair and eyes that had a displeased glare to them. They both wore equally as expensive-looking robes as their father did. Naruto glanced over to Kakashi and nodded. They had both deduced the same things from observing their clients and from what was on their files. Ichiro Ueda was a haughty know-it-all teenager who had to be at least 18, while his brother, Jiro Ueda, was a 17-year-old and a cynical and quiet guy who was probably shaped with the idea that he would not directly inherit the family line in lieu of his older brother. "Welcome, welcome," boomed the overly happy voice of the Ueda head. His large belly bounced up and down as he noticed the shinobi. He had outstretched arms as he sauntered over to the group. "We're so glad to have you here, of course, of course. With the bandits coming around for us, of course." Naruto watched as Sasuke's eyebrows twitched at the verbal tick. "Of course," drawled Kakashi sarcastically, much to the amusement of his students who snickered in the background. Not that the man noticed. "Well then, we're almost loaded and we already had lunch, of course," continued their client. "We always leave in the afternoon. My boys absolutely despise having to wake up early, as you know." "A shame, really," added the Hatake. The large man explained that the money had been sent to the Hokage and that the shinobi would be paid after the mission was completed with a C-rank pay. Team 7 was already aware of this, however. It was generally how most mission protocols worked out, with a few exceptions here and there. They simply indulged him in his clarification. Soon, the caravan was ready to embark on their 2-day journey. "Good luck, my boys," bellowed the Ueda patriarch. "You'll do well, of course." The glasses-wearing teen briefly acknowledged his parent with a head tilt and said, "You really should stop doting on us, father. It really does get irritating at times. Perhaps you should rely on our servants to carry your boxes instead of your educated and proper children." Yeah, whatever, father," snapped Jiro, who was the shorter brother. "We'll write when we get attacked by bandits along the way." Naruto and Sasuke shared a quick glance with one another and an unspoken message was shared between the two friends. The mission was undoubtedly going to be a long one. If they were annoyed by the merchant family now, they could not imagine how it was going to turn out much later when they were already hours into it. As they knew Shikamaru would say what a drag. And so they went on with the hot summer sun baking their backs as if they were supposed to be rising bread dough in an oven. They easily exited the gates of Mia with their long trail of carts and horses following behind, and both Ichiro and Jiro Ueda were sitting with bored looks on their faces inside carriages. Ichiro was fanning himself was a hand-painted paper fan decorated with ferocious tigers, and his sibling simply glowered in his own horse-drawn carriage. All in all, Naruto deeply felt that the two had sticks so far up their asses that they must have been poking out through their frontal lobes, free, which may have caused severely negative effects on their personalities. Not that he would say anything out loud without getting in trouble. He just knew that his team wanted to say it though. The blonde almost felt bad for the poor servants. They were sweating and huffing with absolutely no complaint, and they even had to deal with the endless complaints from the two brothers without showing distress themselves. At least, he hoped, they were getting paid in decent figures. There was no way he could be bribed enough Rio in the universe to work for those fellows. But wait. Naruto groaned in his head. He already was working for them. With that grim thought in mind, he shoved his hands in his pockets and moped, earning a questioning eye from both Sasuke and Sakura. Much of the trip continued in a similar vein. The heat was incredibly sweltering, the wheels on which their carts and merchandise sat swayed in a seemingly rhythmic pattern, and it seemed that for all intents and purposes that a thickening, figurative, misty cloud had been created out of the horrid humidity and descended upon their bones. Amidst the weather were the continuous complaints from the Ueda brothers. From Ichiro's whining about the uncomfortable rocking of his personal carriage, to Jiro's moaning about how pointless it all was for Daddy Dearest to hire a pack of trained shinobi from Konoha because they were probably all going to die alone in a ditch anyway. Naruto was prepared for his irritation to escape from him via spontaneous combustion. He even thought that he would ask Kakashi-sensei to put out the flames with some sort of water jutsu. "I think we should stop here for the night," Kakashi spoke lazily when the sun had barely peeked out beyond the horizon. A crimson-orange sunset bathed the land of rice paddies in its minimal light. The taller Ueda, Ichiro, stuck his head out of the window in his carriage. "Oh, I was not aware that an uncouth ninja such as you could think," he sneered. "Honestly, you'd think we're all a circus band with your funny outerwear." Naruto started to lunge at the older brother with a snarl on his face. "Hey, you can't just..." Fortunately enough, Kakashi was able to stop the kid before he did anything too rash, and the man continued, saying, "What Naruto was trying to say is that he agrees with me. The area is getting darker, and it would be best for all of us if we rested here and made camp so that we could travel in the morning." The silver-haired shinobi then promptly clamped a hand over Naruto's mouth, much to the boy's immense displeasure. With a huff, Ichiro ordered his servants to carry him out of the cozy confines of his traveling coach. The men scrambled to please him. One even went so far as to collapse upon his knees and bend forward so that his back was exposed, and the teen stepped onto the poor gentleman without so much as a word right before his pristine shoes touched the surface of the dirt road. Much to the dismay of his older brother, Jiro got out by himself. Though both did not bother to assist the shinobi and the other workers when it came to unpacking and setting up a temporary camp. Kakashi then commanded Naruto to be their lookout while he, Sasuke, and Sakura helped to put out tents and sleeping bags. The lone female on the team did not hesitate to squeal in delight at the prospect of working with her beloved Sasuke-kun, and the Uchiha in question sent a withering, jealous look over to his best friend. The sun steadily dipped behind the image of the rice fields just as Naruto heeded orders and hopped onto the roof of one of the fabric-covered wagons. He crouched and enhanced his hearing and sight with chakra, azure irises scanning the surroundings without pause. It just so happened that the wagon he had chosen as his designated perch was the very same wagon that the Ueda brothers had decided to sit underneath so that they could find solace in the shade it gave. Ichiro looked like he was writing a set of notes in a travel journal. He fiddled with his glasses occasionally. "Fantastic," he said loudly. "Those lowly shinobi really are unaware of the intricacies of properly unloading packed items." "Jiro," he added in the direction of his sibling, "just look at how roughly that Jounin takes them out of our wagons." "That's probably because he's used to unpacking bodies," growled Jiro. "This is pointless. I don't care if that guy's a Jounin or whatever, those kids are genin." How are a bunch of dim-witted runts supposed to protect us? Father and that Hokage must have lost their minds. He frowned as he stared at the pink hair of Sakura. Plus we have that idiot girl and those two snot-nosed boys. I can't believe a man like the fourth allowed them in. The Hokage sounds like a moron to me. Naruto pursed his lips. He did not appreciate the rude commentary, especially since he was right where he could hear them so clearly. So he inadvertently decided to speak up. I can hear you, said the blonde. The sound caused the two brothers to look up in surprise. They craned their necks to see Naruto's face staring back down at them from the top of the coach. When the boy realized that he had accidentally spoken his thoughts out loud, he groaned. It's not nice to talk crap about the people trying to protect you. His eyes moved to the book that currently resided in the older Ueda's lap, and with a sudden start, Naruto finally saw that the notebook Ichiro was writing in was not a travel journal, but rather a complaint journal. There were phrases written in bullet form: incompetent guards, atrocious unpacking skills, lacking in needed finesse. The further his eyes read the various scribbles, an even bigger headache began to throb at his temples. The annoyance started to build up to a point that he felt like a pot was about to boil over in his brain. It's not your job to eavesdrop, the elder brother spat importantly. It is my job to eavesdrop, replied Naruto as he puffed out his chest proudly. I'm a shinobi. Not on your clients, obviously, pointed out Ichiro with a flare of his glasses lenses. The boy leaped off of the top of his post and landed neatly next to the two brothers. A puff of dust floated up in a tiny cloud as his sandals scraped the ground. The older Ueda brother crinkled his nose in disgust. Keep your look, interrupted Naruto. Your dad spent money to keep you guys safe. He trusts you to go on this trip without him, and he trusts us to protect you from bandits. He narrowed his eyes to emphasize his point, then continued, so you keep to your business, and we'll keep to our business. And I don't appreciate you insulting our Hokage, They did not exchange words soon after that, at least for a few hours, and Naruto had promptly switched places so that he could watch over the camp during the first shift without any unnecessary distractions until it was time for him to go to sleep and for Kakashi to go next. And finally in the morning, the caravan left their clearing for the last day of travel to the village of Saga, until they arrived in the very late afternoon. The village was situated on top of a great hill and had buildings sprawled throughout it so that it looked like a giant had sprinkled them on a gargantuan cupcake. The roofs of all of them were of varying shades and ranged in all kinds of sizes. A stone wall enclosed the village, and a lookout tower hovered nearby and was manned by a ninja of yet another Rice Paddy's clan. By the time the traveling group entered Saga's grounds, they already had been checked and searched. The shinobi from Konoha had noticed that Saga was much grander than Mia and seemed to be dominated by a ninja clan called the Tsukino. 4. Members of said clan bore dark blue circles with a singular white stamp in the middle of it on their clothing. Many active ninja were wearing uniforms that resembled the gray vests and black pants of the Cloud Village, but they deviated from the design with many of the purple motifs added on like the sandals were. Instead of the dusty roads that seemed to snake around Mia, Saga had significantly more paved streets. People along with the Tsukino shinobi walked around on them and mingled with each other. The stores were cleaner and the people looked happier. It was with this observation in mind that Naruto realized that this was probably because Saga was largely controlled by a huge clan of ninja. The people must have felt more, and as a result the air permeated a greater taste of security as compared to the portion of the land of rice paddies that Team 7 had passed through. It especially helped that since the country was still fresh from a civil war, the village gained a sense of stability to be united under one clan rather than multiple fighting ones. If one did not know better, one could even say that Saga looked to be the humble beginnings of a hidden village. Though in the middle of it all there was more than a handful of people that were acting strangely with their eyes shifting every so often, like they were worried about something that would not appear and that was most definitely not there. Naruto and Sasuke raised their eyebrows at this, exchanged looks with their two other teammates, and they all determined how odd that was without saying a word. "This is our stop," one of the servants informed the travelers, and the caravan plus Shinobi halted in front of a large warehouse behind a store labeled Trader Jin's. The place was a gigantic supermarket exclusively for traded goods. Apparently, the Ueda merchant house had a contract with them and was delivering their orders of rice cakes and rice sacks in exchange for money. The husband and wife that ran the store were overly enthusiastic to learn that their delivery had come safely. They complained that there had been a lot of attacks on the roads lately and no one knew why. People assumed that it was bandits because something was always missing from the traveling party and it was usually food or money. But sometimes, they said with overly serious faces, a person would go missing. It was a daunting thought, especially because people were involved, but they also reassured them that it was normally people wandering around the outskirts of Saga late at night. With this and the combination of the missing goods from select caravans, merchants had been terrified to go anywhere near Saga and Trader Jin's had been receiving defective goods for months. That explained the strangeness of some of the population. "Sounds like a case of serial kidnappings," intoned Kakashi with a seemingly bored facade. "I'm sure the Tsukino clan can handle it." "But the thing is, they haven't taken care of it," replied the wife hotly. The husband patted the woman on her back. Now, dear. None of those conspiracy theories you've been spewing about for weeks. The attacks have been getting less, haven't they? I'm sure what they say about supernatural wild dogs assaulting people can't be true. It sounds ridiculous." "How can you say that?" the lady bellowed, her hands on her hips now. "Over 30 people are gone and all you can say is, 'Thank you, Shinobi-san,'" butted in her spouse as he ignored her ranting, "for bringing these fine rice cakes over to us safely." And that was the end of it. The Ueda brothers were given a heap of golden coins for their trouble and were hastily brushed aside. The shop was closed for the day with a heavy slam of the door. Ichiro wailed about how rude it all was and Jiro grumbled about the increased probability that they would each die gruesome deaths without the prospect of any outside assistance. After the brothers began complaining about upset stomachs and how they really should eat lunch, no matter how late it would be, the group decided on eating. The group minus the servants who wandered off on a break, stopped at a restaurant. The sun was still peeking out over the hill in the afternoon and all thoughts of the strange story that the couple at Trader Jin's had shared fled from their minds. Previously they searched for a decent place to eat and people on the streets highly recommended a place known as the Full Moon Diner and they were able to locate it fairly easily. The place was renowned throughout the village and apparently throughout the land of rice paddies for cooking up the best meat pies which were uncreatively titled Full Moon Pies. Despite their formerly disgusting demeanors, the Ueda brothers were surprisingly pleasantly delighted to enter the restaurant, though that could be attributed to the fact that many of the higher echelon of their nation and many of their other snobby peers had also eaten at the place as Ichiro had informed them time and again. Full Moon Diner was run by a faction of the Tsukino clan and was by all means a family restaurant. It looked like the majority of the people that worked there had the customary Tsukino crest somewhere on their clothing. Inside the restaurant it was dimly lit and every table had 3 neatly placed candles atop them that had small flickering flames, as well as pristine dark blue tablecloths. The floor was made of wood panels and waiters and waitresses made them creak as they stepped on them. Almost every single spot was occupied with a customer. In one of the corners a dark-haired woman was sitting on a low stool that had an elevated platform in front of it. On top of this platform rested a koto, 5, an elongated hollow wooden instrument that had 13 strings on it. Her fingers moved gracefully across them, and although some could say that the music was beautiful, Naruto thought that it sounded somewhat foreboding as each string was plucked, like there was something waiting behind a door somewhere he could not see. The 5 of them were directed to a long rectangular table on a far wall and a lady walked up to them with a smile on her face. "My name is Chie Tsukino," said the woman with a smile. She had long, black, and flowing hair that reached far past her mid-back. Her eyes were gray and sparkled knowingly, and if Naruto had to say so himself, she had a very beautiful figure that exuded calm and tranquility. She appeared young, like she was only in her mid-20s. Her face was round and heart-shaped and just under her left eye was a tiny mole. I'm the owner of this restaurant, she continued. I am very pleased that you are here and, she pointedly looked at Team 7 who sat nearest to each other. I see we even have foreigners gathered at our humble diner. She raised an eyebrow at them. Would you fine guests require a drink before you order? Yes, replied Ichiro with another one of his haughty smirks. I'll have jasmine tea. Sake, ordered Jiro immediately without as much as a second thought. Naruto grumbled to himself about what a drag it would be to heave a drunk guy on the streets in the middle of a weekday afternoon. The rest of Team 7 simply asked for water. The drinks barely arrived when Jiro was already asking for more rice wine. Naruto sank into his seat further and Sakura was staring at him and giggling. It was then that they were prepared to order and all 5 of them requested for the infamous full moon pie. If they were going to make it all the way in the middle of Saga, they might as well get something memorable for it. Minutes later, 5 sets of the meat pie came in simultaneously. A waiter set them one by one in front of them, almost like each pie was so delicate that it could crumble with an instant. Naruto grinned and stared at his portion. The pie was a little smaller than his head, circular, and steaming hot. Its crust was yellowish-brown and looked delectable and crispy. The middle was caved a bit and the dent was filled with a scoop of white jasmine rice and an egg was cracked on top of that. Naruto's mouth was watering profusely and he did not hesitate to dig in with the long-handled spoon he was given. As the team and the Uedas ate, the sound of the koto in the background seemed to dissolve in the background. With each pluck of its string, another bite was taken, and the late lunch went on. Everyone thoroughly enjoyed the amazing meat pies, though Jiro constantly asked for more and more sake. It was no surprise that Jiro had gotten piss-drunk by the time they were all finished. Ichiro vehemently refused to go anywhere near his younger sibling and so thus all the carrying and dragging went to Team 7, much to the immense displeasure of, well, all of them. Jiro ran into a wall all by himself and the group was hard-pressed to leave the restaurant and get back on the streets, not that it helped much. They still had a handful of hours of deliveries to do. "H," mumbled the drunk Ueda loudly, "look at that dumbass bitch." He swayed from side to side and Sakura barely caught him with her shoulder and let out a displeased growl. "Don't call me that," snarled the pink-haired female. "That's rude." "Wasn't talkin' to you," garbled Jiro in reply. He pointed a finger to someone's pet that just passed by them. "Talkin' to the dog." The team laughed and the boys joked about how it was hilarious how Sakura had assumed that the aforementioned bitch was her. They laughed even harder when her face turned into a deep crimson and she started sputtering sentences that were no doubt defending her being but ultimately failing. In the whole process, Jiro stumbled along and chuckled drunkenly at random things and people that sped along. And so for the rest of the remaining daylight hours they delivered their goods to various stores around the huge and spread-out village until all carts were empty save for their own personal items. In no time, the first and arguably the most tedious part of the mission was completed. All that was left was for the team to escort their clients back home safely to Mie, preferably when dawn broke out. But knowing the extremely laid-back and spoiled brothers, they most likely would not be leaving till the afternoon the next day. They had simply gotten lucky that day when they left camp relatively early. All in all, the mission was going smoothly so far, except for the fact that they had to slog around a completely wasted individual. They had not had any significant delays and they had somehow avoided being ambushed by enemy bandits. Though if the genin had to be honest with themselves, they were pretty bored with how things were going. Kakashi seemed happy enough in comparison. Naruto was munching on a rice cake when the group finally settled in at a hotel for the night. They were about to walk in when he suddenly jumped when something twitched in the bushes. A pair of yellow eyes peeked out at him, attached to a small, harmless snake that was roughly the size of his forearm. He stared at its eyes like he was in a semi-trance, like the reptile was reading his soul. The blonde remained like that for seconds until he perked up at the sound of a voice calling his name. The snake then slithered away almost instantaneously. Shaking his hair out of his eyes, Naruto followed his team inside. Fortunately, the hotel they were all staying at was very nice. Unfortunately, the Ueda patriarch had not paid for it and the money had come straight out of their paycheck, and as if that was not bad enough, they had to room right next to the Uedas. This bites, the Namikaze groaned when he sat on his futon. Just be glad that this thing is almost over, replied Sasuke, who was on the futon opposite from him. Kakashi was moving around on his own and giggling furiously at the Ika Ika book he brought along. Sakura was in another half of the room, separated from the boys by a sliding wood and paper door. I just want to go back to Konoha now. I don't know if I can stand doting around these guys any longer. Tell me about it. Sasuke grunted and reluctantly turned over in his mattress, shifting into the most comfortable position possible. Well, we better sleep while we can. Kakashi-sensei said he'll take first watch anyway. To this comment, said teacher only seemed to giggle louder and both boys sighed in frustration. Yeah. See you in the morning, Uchiha. Naruto flipped over on his side as well and closed his eyes. The full moon shone brightly through the window pane and the stars twinkled in the black blanket that was the night sky. In the distance, something howled ominously and its sound reverberated in the air. Now, one could say that the Tsukino clan was almost as great as the founding clans of the Land of Fire, but the fact is that they were not. They had the unfortunate luck that they lived in the land of rice paddies, a small country with a small fried daimyo that was just barely able to unify the warring clans after years of fighting and turmoil. But, if there was any powerful shinobi clans in such an irrelevant nation, it would be the Tsukino clan. At least they did not act through stupidity by attacking the village hidden in the mist like the Kagaya clan did. Unlike most of their enemies, they had a bloodline limit, and a strangely unique one at that. They were skilled shinobi with the only weaknesses that included that they were small compared to the more powerful clans and arguably did not have the resources to thrive as well. But even so, even a great lesser clan like the Tsukino had their stories. They even had their conspiracies. So it was no surprise that some members wanted to be better, wanted to feel unlimited like the others from powerful hidden villages. The people of Saga that the Tsukino protected were talkers, of course. On one hand they spoke well of their shinobi protectors. They were grateful to them, but some of them were wary. Some of them knew. The wife of Jin from Trader Jin's was one of those people. This was because she was good friends with one of the clan. Her friend had whispered to her about the lady at the meat pie restaurant. She heard about how this woman had lost her husband years ago in a battle with another clan. This woman was fine, they said, until she met up with a mysterious man. They whispered with each other about how the Tsukino suspected that this man was a rogue ninja from a shinobi village, and how powerful he must have been. They talked about how the woman from the restaurant knew that this man was recruiting followers and that he had offered up power in return for loyalty, a power so terribly wonderful that it could bring back her dead husband. The woman had supposedly questioned if he could really bring back the dead, but in the end, they said that this woman took up the offer greedily, still consumed with her grief, and that she had not been the same since. She was strange, they murmured, odd. She was happy and seemed normal on the surface, but to those who really knew her, it would not matter that she ran such a well-known restaurant. Before, the place had been a family business with her husband after all. Who really knew? But then again, the wife at Trader Jin's claimed that these were only whispers. Oh, the fox was trapped and growling in its cage as usual. All 9 tails were swishing behind it like they were swatting away flies. But somehow, the scene was different. Instead of the all-out malice its eyes held previously, something was changed about the way it looked at Naruto as the boy stared right back up at him. I know you, Naruto murmured to the great being. Yes you do, replied the fox with a pounding tone. As you should. What do you want now? Asked the blonde with crinkle in his brow. One of the Kyuubi's paws rested atop the golden water amidst the sewage-like surroundings. It tilted its head like it was contemplating something. I know you are not afraid of me. I have known it for a long time, the voice boomed outwardly, but that does not change the fact that you are my container and I am the contained. So I will warn you once again, and the gigantic chakra construct bored red eyes into Naruto's azure ones. You must get out of this loop. 1. The longer you remain here, the further back you will return in your real timeline once you leave. I do not know the way, you must figure out the answer for yourself. I was able to slow it down when you were sucked in, but it won't hold on forever. I can tell you that it is impossible to change, Ruto. Naruto. Get up. The genin in question opened his eyes in confusion. He saw the frantic look of his Kakashi and Ai-san, his sensei. The odd dream still lingered on in his mind, but he did not know what it meant. However, something strange tingled in his gut, like his body knew what the cryptic message about a loop meant, but his thoughts could not quite catch up. But he did not have any more time to think. What? Naruto let out sleepily. Kakashi shook his head. I need you to wake Sasuke and Sakura. Then the Jounin gave him a serious look. We have a problem. At that notion, Naruto was on his feet in an instant. The ingrained reflexes within his muscles were giving him that telltale adrenaline rush. His eyes became super focused and his vision grew sharper, so he briefly acknowledged his teacher when he sprinted off to his task. The Namikaze turned to his sleeping comrade and quickly shook him awake. At the concentrated look in his eye, Sasuke too recognized a serious situation when he saw one. Luckily, they both were already in their shinobi attire, as any good ninja should be on a mission, and only needed to pick up some of their supplies. The boys went to the next half of the hotel room and slid the door open only to find that Sakura had awoken to the noise. The trio nodded at each other and Naruto led them out to follow their teacher into the hotel hallway. I'm a shadow clone, the Kakashi that they had trailed to the entrance of the Ueda brothers' room said. He instructed Naruto to make another clone to guard Ichiro, who was still fast asleep, and for Sakura and Sasuke to remain behind to assist it. Sasuke would not stand for this, however. He started to protest. No, the silver-haired Hatake commanded. You and Sakura will stay here to balance out the teams as well as possible. You know as well as I do that both Naruto and I are the only ones here that can perform any kind of fuinjutsu. I will need his help. Need his help? Why? What's going on? The Uchiha demanded, and where's Jiro? That's our problem, Kakashi explained calmly. I went to follow him out because he wandered off on his own. I tried to bring him back, but then I noticed something strange about him. It's like he's in a trance. He doesn't respond to anything and keeps walking to some unknown destination. But that's not the only oddity, and his single dark visible eye sharpened, his mouth is slightly open and there is a seal on his tongue that I have never seen before. I think he is being controlled. Sakura gasped, a hand flying to cover her mouth. But how could something like that happen? I don't know, the man added. I will lead Naruto to the main Kakashi and they will try to break the seal. He gestured to the trio and briefly looked them all in the eye. It felt like they were being scrutinized. There is a chance that this mission is going to go over your heads. If that is the case, I want you, the client, and the 4 servants to get out of here and head in the direction of Mia, no questions asked. Naruto and my counterpart will be right behind you and hopefully we will have called for reinforcements via one of the transport message tubes that the Hokage gave me. We will rendezvous about 5 kilometers from Saga on the Oda main road. We'll figure it out from there. But how will we know if the mission is too much? Asked the girl on the team. If Naruto's clone pops, you'll know, was the reply from the teacher, and then I want you to get out of here. Got it? The trio nodded in response, though Sasuke still looked like he wanted to contest the order. He did not only because it was the best course of action and it would not do to make stupid moves in a potentially dangerous situation. Otherwise, things would turn out to be a disaster. Kakashi handed Sasuke one of the messenger tubes that he had in his weapons pouch. Use this if you need to give a message to the Hokage, he said seriously. There's a paper inside. Write on it and put it back inside the tube. Use your chakra to activate it and the message should transport directly to the tower using a space-time seal. Keep it short though. The tube is limited to the length of messages it can teleport. With that communicated, Team 7 split ways. Ichiro was being watched by Sasuke, Sakura, and the Naruto shadow clone as he slept. The real Naruto followed the doppelganger Kakashi to the outside of the hotel. They silently tiptoed down the stairs without a sound and disappeared out the first-floor lobby window, and the wind whispered across their forms. The clone led Naruto to the back of the building they had just exited. They pressed their backs up against the wall, their shadows drowned out by the strange white brightness of the full moon. It glowed like no other with an odd orange-like ring. It was at that very moment that Naruto realized that the nighttime sky was hazy and hadn't there already been a full moon that month. The thought was chased out of his head as soon as the Kakashi lookalike moved his hand to gesture to follow him to a path that winded to the edge of the wall of Saga. When he saw this, a sinking feeling rested in his gut, like a stone that had dropped to the bottom of a nameless ocean. They were leaving the village. Without much trouble at all, the two Konoha shinobi were able to slip out through a small door on the barrier. This greatly confused Naruto. It should not have been that easy. It was almost as if the Tsukino clan was conveniently not watching the wall at that very moment. So, what the heck was going on? They continued into the forest at the base of the hill the village laid on. The night seemed more gloomy than usual, and the further down they walked, it only got worse. That is, until the Kakashi clone guided Naruto to hide behind a particular bush. The older man nodded at Naruto and they skillfully hid. It was quiet for a moment, then there came the soft sound of footsteps. In the moonlight, a dark figure emerged. Its feet made a soft plunk-plunk noise, and the tension in Naruto's arteries began to rise, like his heart was preparing itself for a coronary. The figure finally was fully lit and appeared behind a copse of trees. It turned out to be a young, bulky man with dark hair and... "Jiro," whispered the clone beside the boy. "Don't move," he added with a look towards the blonde. Just as the teacher mentioned before, the younger Ueda brother was walking in a daze. His eyes were completely blank and his jaw was basically lolling open. His arms were swinging lazily at his side in a strange rhythmic motion that seemed more like two pendulums than a pair of limbs. Perhaps the oddest phenomenon with the whole scenario was that he walked as if he was about to fall and stumble, and he did not stop, he stayed in the same pace. Seconds later a swish was heard and the real Kakashi suddenly made an appearance on the other side of Naruto. The man made a signal and nodded, and the clone puffed away. As if he had always been there, the teacher calmly asked, "Do you see the seal?" Naruto bobbed his head to mean yes. "What can you tell me about it?" questioned Kakashi. The Namikaze shrugged. His eyes were focused on the task before him, but his fingers fumbled with his weapon's pouch. "Not much. I'm only a beginner. Mom started teaching me just 2 years ago." Nevertheless, the man leaned forward and gestured to continue anyway. Naruto's lips pursed. "I can tell you that it's a complicated piece of crap. It's not like anything I've seen before." Then he scratched his head and whispered, "But it's strange. The way the seal is put on makes it look like someone put it there indirectly, like they made the poor guy paint it on himself." Or his blue eyes lit up and Kakashi immediately knew that the boy was on to something. "What?" the Jounin furthered with an intense gaze and with urgency. Their target was slowly drifting away. "What is it?" "They spiked his drink with liquid Fujitsu," replied the student. "I know it doesn't make any sense, but Mom always says that you can see how a seal was made if you look at the form, and that weird thing is shaped like a water-based seal. It's the only thing I got." Kakashi's eyes intensified at the realization. "So to destroy it we probably need to counter it with another liquid." Naruto groaned and placed his hands on his head. "You gotta be kidding me. We have to make a zombie drink something. Just our night." It turned out that the situation was more dubious than they originally thought. Not knowing how to counter a seal neither male had ever laid eyes on before, they needed to examine it closely. Immediately, both shinobi noticed the problem at hand. They looked at each other quickly, and in an unspoken agreement they stalked Jiro, specialized wire in hand. Kakashi had the lead and they crouched in the forest, waiting for the right moment. Finally, he prepped the wire in his palms, gesturing to his team member to prepare for a possible struggle, and the duo saw Jiro walk out into a clearing at the base of Saga's hill. The trees were more spread out from the thinning forest. The path became clearer and less dusty. The nighttime wind rustled the grass towards the middle, making an ominous ripple in the center of the circular glade. And there was Jiro, right in the ripple, like a statue. He had suddenly stopped moving, but Naruto and Kakashi did not think anything of it. As a single unit, the duo surged forward. The Ueda did not see what was coming, not that he was particularly paying attention to his surroundings. Then he tipped over without a sound, which was bizarre enough, and there was absolutely no struggle. Kakashi had no trouble wrapping up their client in wire, though the teenager was still very much awake. Naruto observed, puzzled, as he opened up Jiro's mouth a little further to study the mysterious seal. As soon as he saw it at a closer proximity, he gasped and his eyes widened in horror. Kakashi Sensitha Sealits, a growling noise reverberated in the air. The two shinobi stopped all movement right away, frozen in their respective tasks. The debris from leaves and fallen branches on the ground sounded like they were being crunched underfoot, but the sound was different. It did not have the same weight to it, like something else was pushing the earth. When Naruto finally mustered enough courage to look up from the oval-shaped tongue seal, he moved his head up with wide eyes. There before them was a pack of enormous dogs, at least 6 or 7 of them in all. They were so large that they would be taller than Kakashi standing if they went up on 2 legs. It was almost wholly abnormal. Their fur stood on end, as if in anticipation for something, and they were pitch black. Their eyes glowed yellow in the evening and their canines stuck out of their maws, razor-sharp like knives. Paws scraped at the grass and the growls heightened in frequency. In the midst of it all, Jiro remained ominously still and his eyes remained blank as he breathed in his trance. Another movement stirred in the background and behind the animal pack were humanoid creatures. There were 4 of them, snarling just like the dogs. But there was something far more unnatural about them. "We need to get out of here," Kakashi-sensei whispered urgently. His hand was slowly inching towards one of his kunai. The creatures behind the pack stalked closer as if on edge, waiting for something. The 4 strangest ones were crouching, triangular ears pointed atop their head and dark gray fur lining the backs of their hands and human-like hair flaring in the wind. It was then that Naruto noticed that they looked like they were half-human. They were not on all 4s, they were on 2 legs and leaning forward as if they were about to walk on their hands too. They had scraps of clothing strapped onto them haphazardly with numerous rips and tears. These were no ordinary animals. On the count of 3, the Jounin spoke quietly, "You and I pick up our client and head back to where we came from." Naruto agreed silently as soon as it was said. "1" came the whispered word. Both shinobi were now perfectly propped on their haunches. Naruto's fingers were surprisingly steady as he held onto one of Jiro's limp arms. He was still reeling from the reveal of the seal. It was devastating. How could someone even think to use a seal from that? Was that not stealing? No, it was worse. This meant that someone out there knew information that they should not. 2. They were gradually standing now, their charge carefully bound and in hand. Their strange onlookers growled deeper. 3. And they turned and sprinted off into the woods, fast like a flash of light. Their legs pumped and Naruto's muscles burned as he huffed for air. A few seconds passed and they thought they had successfully avoided being overrun by vicious animals, but in less than a moment the hard pounding of paws alerted them to the fact that their enemy was indeed chasing them. Both Leaf Ninja struggled to heave along the client, and Naruto desperately wished that the guy was drunk again because at least he would be stumbling along instead of being simply dead weight. How he had wished that Jiro had drunk a tankard full of sake rather than this. And then, as he followed his teacher around the trunk of a tree, a thought occurred to him and it felt like a light bulb had just lit up inside his brain. The diner, Naruto exclaimed. What? Naruto, just keep going, replied Kakashi loudly. Someone spiked his drink at the diner. Kakashi clearly shot him a look that somehow gave the boy the impression that that moment was definitely not the time to be discussing something like that. Then, they rounded another trunk, skidding a bit as the beasts nipped at their heels in haste. Naruto dragged Jiro's unresponsive body by the arm as Kakashi was forced to drop the legs in favor of putting up a mud wall in defense with an earth element technique. Earth style, mud wall, bellowed the Jounin, and with one spurt from the ground it rumbled and was produced fully. Upon the wall were protruding faces of various collared dogs, one of which appeared distinctly like an enraged bulldog. Picking up on his own instincts, Naruto barely waited for his teacher to catch up as he held up their enemies for all but a handful of seconds. Shuriken flashed outward and Kakashi threw them with true aim at the heads of the pack, some of which jumped away with a twirl. The man ushered his student forward and they were off again at full pace. An explosion resounded behind the sprinting ninja and rocks and numerous other artifacts sprinkled their hair. The external force pushed them onto their haunches, and when Naruto glanced back, the artificial wall had soundly disintegrated. Shit, the blonde shouted when at least two of the hybrid wolf humans leapt from behind the curtain of smoke. The sound of the others following them was not that distant. What the hell? How did they do that so fast? It turned out that the few precious seconds that it took for the Leaf Shinobi to get up from their knees was detrimental to a successful escape. The animals were unnaturally fast. It was terrifying. It was as if one could blink, and in the duration of time it took to blink, the hybrid beasts would already be right in front of your face and drooling for a bite. Unfortunately, that is almost exactly what occurred next. Naruto yelled when one of their claws was centimeters from scratching off his nose. He pushed himself backward, leaving Jiro's body prone and spread-eagled on top of a pile of dried-up leaves in the process, and flipped reflexively until he was at least a few meters away from his attacker. Huffing, he prepped his hands in the shape of the ram seal and was about to call out the Kage Bunshin technique when Kakashi unexpectedly appeared before him, holding an arm out as if to halt him from what he was about to do. For a moment, everything was still. Even the sound of growling canines did not disturb the silence, but then someone started clapping and Naruto finally realized that his teacher had heard something before he did. When the noise began, the remaining dogs and the humanoid creatures began inching toward Jiro. With a horrifying drop in his gut, Naruto precipitously knew that they were after their client. However, that was not the most startling realization after all. How adorable, a woman's voice chimed darkly. As soon as he heard it, the Namikaze decided that he was unquestionably done with everything that had happened already that evening. As if things could get any weirder than it had already gotten. Fate was wholly against him though. Are you trying to disturb my hunt? She continued. Neither Naruto nor Kakashi could see her face yet. The soft and ominous click-clack of her shoes hit the forest floor and the full moon gradually enveloped a familiar form in light. And then came out a beautiful woman with long flowing hair and a kind-looking face, a face that did not suit her demeanor at all. The dark locks of her hair billowed in the warm summer breeze, and her full lips curled into a smirk. Chiya Tsukino finally showed herself. The circular crest of the Tsukino clan was sewed onto the sleeve of her plain purple kimono and it shone like a beacon in the shadows. That's my meat that you were trying to take away, she said eerily as she brushed invisible dust off her front. It's awfully rude to steal, you know. Steal? Naruto shot out incredulously. You can't steal a human being. Instead of outright answering the retort, the woman had opted to remain silent and she continued to smile. She made a slight gesture with one of her hands and a humanoid wolf went to bite the back of the clothes of Jiro, a movement that immediately caught Kakashi's attention. This man happens to be our client, the Jounin stated seriously. His black eyes were shining in concentration. Chiya flashed the two a glare that could kill with one look. This man happens to be my prey, she replied harshly. Now I suggest that you do not interfere with my hunt again or I will have to personally detain you, regardless of your misplaced affiliations, she said with a swift glimpse at their leaf headbands. Naruto snarled and he stood up to his full height behind his teacher's still outstretched arm. Shut up, he snapped angrily, an infuriated fuel beginning to pump through his system. How the hell is this guy your prey? He's an innocent civilian and a client to the Hidden Leaf. Leave him alone and find something else to hunt. We'll be off your back in no time, lady. Naruto, Kakashi warned, and for the moment that placated the genin and he shut his mouth, still visibly fuming as he clenched his fists. The two shinobi were expecting a heated response, a lashing out, an attack. They were expecting the dogs and the weird creatures to come running after them again with their claws and sharp teeth. Perhaps they thought that a paper bomb would come out at any moment and that they would have to avoid a multitude of weapons, but nothing like what actually happened. Instead of what they thought would most likely ensue, they were met with barely muffled laughter. Painful laughter. Sad laughter. Crazy, insane laughter. Neither male knew what to feel at that moment. The laughs were like wind chimes, high and wistful, but they were also depressing, like the hums were missing something. Then, to counteract the normality of it all, the laughs also sounded like grating on glass, inherently evil. I don't forget my customers at Full Moon Diner, the woman informed between chuckles, so I remember you too. You came for lunch in the afternoon, asking me to serve you our most famous dish. She grinned and the hairs on Naruto's neck stuck up. Of course I gave it to you. But the customers I never, ever forget, are the bane of this village's existence. She shrugged her shoulders almost gracefully, like a princess might. They come to my place and act all self-important, and then they order alcohol, hoping to get drunk. You see, one of those drunkard bastards made a mess of my restaurant one night and I was so upset. Me husband and I worked so hard to keep the place going, and even after he died, well, her expression hardened. It doesn't matter. I decided from that day on, I could continue my husband's legacy, create a better meat pie than the one that was known throughout the entire continent, and who better to use than the useless scum in existence? Who better to use than the people that this village would be better without anyway? Dread sank itself onto the leaf shinobi's shoulders, and Naruto knew that this woman was the one that put the sealing spell in Jiro's sake that afternoon. There was no mistaking it. The evidence was all there. She was practically confessing to it. But he did not like where this was going, and he did not think he was prepared for it. Every famous dish has a secret ingredient, Chiya added with a crazed chortle. Naruto saw as Kakashi's free hand tightly gripped onto a kunai, saw how Jiro still had that clueless and dumb blank facade on his face. He could feel the stares from the yellowed eyes of the vicious dogs around him, and the trees seemed to sway toward him, one by one, a silent symphony with a black conductor of night. And then, mine happens to be human flesh. The Bon's eyes widened in horror and he started to gag. No, he was not ready for something like that after all. He clutched his middle on instinct for support, and he wanted so desperately to throw up with forced dry heaves. His stomach churned disapprovingly. Nothing happened, of course, but nothing stopped the alarming terror that wrapped him from the inside out as he realized that he and his entire team had eaten. He saw how even Kakashi's hand was shaking slightly. The Jounin was nonetheless as perturbed as he was. Damn it, he could not let either Sasuke or Sakura know about this. He wanted to claw out his insides. Pop your clone, Kakashi gasped out. His eyebrows were knit together and Naruto could see that he was attempting to hide his emotions and was having more trouble than usual. Under the circumstances, it seemed understandable. But he did not want to understand. What? Naruto replied shakily. You heard me. Do it, came the uttered command. The genin pulled himself together as best as he could, trying to shake out the horrible thoughts from this head, and he signaled the ram sign with his hands again. In quick succession, there was a pump of blue chakra through his arms and he felt the release of his shadow clone in the hotel. The animals bared their teeth in response to the actions, and then Kakashi was bursting forward with incredible speed, his arm coming back in preparation for an attack. Chidori, bellowed he, and his silver hair whipped around, being reflected in the white of the moonlight. Lighting flashed in zigzags, alternating from cerulean to white to green in milliseconds. The Hotake was headed toward the form of Chiya, and he would have eliminated her too, if it wasn't for one of the human hybrids that leapt in front of her. The man-wolf appeared suddenly and Kakashi accidentally pierced through him instead. Blood spurted out like a crimson rainfall and the creature gurgled, as his heart was blasted out of his chest and fried. What was left of the organ flew onto the ground behind the woman he was protecting, and part of its destroyed ventricles pulsed one last time before it stilled, covered in dirt. The beast landed with a squelch a meter from Chiya with a gaping hole in his chest. Somehow, the fur and claws sunk into his skin and a normal man in Tsukino ninja attire was revealed. His eyes were wide open. These opponents were fast. Kakashi was heavily breathing and the hand that he just used to try and finish off the woman was trembling, as if he remembered a similar event occurring before. But as soon as Naruto thought his sensei was going to lose it, the hand dropped again and Kakashi was back into his normal business mode. Sometimes, the boy forgot that he used to be an ANBU. The laughing started again, but this time it was much, much louder. And not a trace of it sounded in the least bit sad. This is one thing you should know about the Tsukino clan, they heard Chiya state matter-of-factly. We're shapeshifters. We have a bloodline that allows us to transform parts of our bodies into a wolf creatures. But, and at this her face was split into a wide smile, it is only on the night of a full moon that we can transform fully. A rip sounded and a tear made itself known on the fabric of the woman's clothing. Her back began to arch high up and her muscles widened. Her chest stuck out further and bulked up too. Fur sprouted up behind her arms and head and her already long mane flared out in anticipation. And, she said in a voice that started to sound more guttural than normal. Her hands popped out of their sockets and her fingers spread out. Her nails extended into claws and her eyes turned large and yellow-red. Something swarmed from beneath her robes and a strange set of tomo swam on her furry skin to sit behind her neck, glowing flat in an orange color. Was it a seal? And, she went on in her two-tone voice, tonight happens to be a blue moon, the second full moon this month. Now before them stood another wolf-like monster. She was more feminine than the others because of the length of her hair and her slightly shorter height, but that did not take away from her terrifying nature. Her fur was gray like the others of the Tsukino clan, but her eyes and that odd marking on her neck made her all the more intimidating. Naruto knew that she would be the most dangerous. He did not have to be a ninja to know that. "Get out of here," yelled Kakashi. "Head to the rendezvous point." The Namikaze was at a loss. Was he just asked to leave his teacher behind? He was shoved back by a powerful arm, an arm he noticed was attached to the teacher in question. The dogs were more than growling now, they were jumping and leaping at them. The remaining two wolf creatures lunged at the body of Jiro and quickly heaved him onto their shoulders. Eyes and claws flashed and teeth were bared. It was then that the singing started and the eerie tenor reverberated in the air like a chill that would not go away. Their opponent was stalking them as a true predator would. Here you are, I really hope you die, I'll murder you like all the others, and cook you in a pie. There you are, I'll skin you with a knife, don't worry, it's okay, I'm just going to take your life." Their eyes were huge. Chiya was singing to them like a mad woman. They hid together for moments, hearing her footsteps crush the earth. Each step felt like a lifeline was being cut repeatedly and Naruto felt a fear that was so foreign to him, it even overshadowed the things he was afraid of before. It was with stark realization that the tune being sung was the very same one that was played at Full Moon Diner by the woman strumming the koto instrument. The thought did not help matters at all. The branches they were behind were brushed aside and shredded like confetti and Kakashi called out a technique that produced earth spikes and pulled Naruto with him. That did not seem to faze her, even as they ran through the trees to find Jiro. Don't be scared, I'll always be right here, don't run away, don't do it, my dogs can smell your fear. Here you are, this song is almost done, I'm really sad but it's alright, in the end you couldn't run. Laughter sliced the winds and pointed objects that looked suspiciously like claws zoomed at them, and they barely dodged as many came spinning and lodged into the barks of trees. A yellowish substance oozed from their tips, and Naruto shuddered as he leapt away behind his teacher, noting that they were lucky to avoid that poison. It's goodbye, it's goodbye, I served you in a pie, you tasted very good inside it, and all you did was die. Their client was suddenly being dragged away more rapidly than previously, and Kakashi took after them in hot pursuit, and Chia's laughter rang when she ordered them to make sure that they were not followed anymore, her song ending as she stared at Jiro's body with delight in her expression. The markings on her neck were flaring violently. Naruto tried to go after them just as he had before, but a few steps in and Kakashi was already pinning him against yet another tree, a wild look in his eyes even as they avoided being found for those few seconds. Listen to me, Naruto, the Jounin spoke piercingly and sternly to his student, this isn't an ordinary mission. He angrily pointed a finger towards where Jiro had retreated. We need to split up. But this isn't the time, he lashed out swiftly. You are a genin. This mission is already way over your head. Plus, you know exactly what you hold inside you. He made a pointed glare towards Naruto's stomach, and the boy cringed, not to mention the political backlash it would cause if we lost you on a job that was supposed to be a C rank. You have to know who you are, Naruto. And at this, Kakashi made sure to let the message sink in as he really stared into his pupil's eyes. No matter what, even if you do want to make a name for yourself, you are still the Hokage's son. Getting you out of here is now part of my duty. Naruto shook his head passionately. But Jiro and the seal? I'll take care of it, was the hasty reply, and Kakashi pushed his message tube into Naruto's hand. He explained that since Naruto was already going to run in the other direction, he should call for reinforcements just in case. Make sure to keep it short. And there's one more piece of paper in there if you need it. Just get out of here and meet with the others. Before they separated, Naruto remembered his shock at the seal on Jiro's tongue. He needed to relay the information right away, so he looked his teacher in the eye seriously beforehand. It's an Uzumaki seal, hissed the boy. That means someone from Konoha must have made it. I don't know how, but you've got to let me look at it when you bring him to us. They nodded at each other and they sprinted off in opposite directions. Naruto barely had to keep any adversaries off his trail because most of them were trying to fight off Kakashi, but the handful that came after him were luckily the small fry and not actual members of the Tsukino clan, and he was very grateful that he did not hear Chia coming after him. They were just the dogs that were barking after him, but he spun around and flung paper bombs at them nevertheless. The smoke belted into existence and the explosion must have killed them. That was what he thought until one came at him that clearly survived. Naruto kicked upward as soon as it got near to him and hit it in its rib cage. The animal whined in pain and a crack signified broken bones. He kneed the animal in the head, and right when the limb made contact, the vicious dog was knocked out and still. He ran through the trees until he was fully out of the forest and about a kilometer away from the hill of Saga. It was then that he decided to take a quick moment to write out a message to the Hokage Tower and send his sensei the needed reinforcements. He whipped out the tube and a single piece of paper from inside it and the 2-inch long pencil and wrote, "Reinforcements. Around Saga Hill. Rice paddies." Then, he pumped his chakra around the tube after he rolled up the paper and stuck it inside, and with a flash the thing had disappeared in reaction to the seal within it, hopefully in the clutches of his father back home or someone else that could help them. Determination filled his being, and he was off yet again to the main road at Oda. Being a ninja meant that it took no time at all to reach the distance Naruto was told and to end at the crossroads of their rendezvous point. Minutes later, Sasuke, Sakura, Ichiro, and the servants made themselves known, and a wave of relief washed over the blonde. His friends were there with him and everyone was safe just as planned. Ichiro was surprisingly awake and was shaking down to his core. The servants were not so much better. How they got there as fast as they did, and especially with pajama-clad civilian cargo, Naruto would never know. Though he suspected that it had something to do with the downright panic that exuded from all of them. He should not have been surprised. After all, the adrenaline rush still flowed like water rapids through his veins. "Where's Kakashi-sensei?" heaved Sakura as she placed her hands upon her knees and breathed heavily. Sweat was trickling down her brow and she looked worried. Luckily Sasuke did not look anywhere near as tired as she did. "And where's my brother?" bellowed Ichiro as an added plus. Naruto sighed and glanced over at his best friend. Understanding spread through them as always. "We need to wait for them here," he replied without really answering the question. "They'll come for us and we need to be ready when they do, you know. Just relax and we'll." He looked over to his teammates and he noted that both of them, including Sakura, knew what he meant. "We'll do our job." "What? What the hell is that supposed to mean?" roared Ichiro to Naruto. The boy did not even flinch. "You're supposed to be protecting us, Mr. Ueda," Sakura reprimanded, but the boys paid it no heed. Naruto lifted his gaze to the fuming Ueda brother before him. "We are protecting you," he said icily. "But in case you haven't noticed, our sensei and your brother have been attacked." The merchant's son stomped in front of Naruto's face and flung his arms out angrily. "Then why aren't you there?" "I was there. But I was needed here. So shut up and don't move and we'll figure this out," ranted the Namikaze back. There was a flash of black and Naruto found that Sasuke's back was towards him. The Uchiha was standing in between both fighting males with a stern expression upon his face. His dark eyes were serious and cold and he had crossed his arms across his chest disapprovingly. He looked first to Naruto and then to Ichiro. The others were in the background staring at them with anxiety. "Enough arguing," remarked Sasuke. "It won't get us anywhere." And that was that. A silence befell the group and they turned away and ignored each other for the most part. The civilians sat around in a circle not too far away from Team 7 as the members of said team sat nearest to the wooden sign marked with Oda Road. "What's going on?" asked Sasuke, and Sakura turned anxious green eyes upon their team member. Naruto told them everything he could. He said that Jiro was targeted by the woman at the Tsukino clan restaurant and that she was undoubtedly insane and should be put out of it for all eternity. He mentioned how the dogs attacked he and Kakashi and how the Tsukino were shape-shifting lycanthropes that could change fully in the light of the full moon. He briefly saw Sakura and was reminded of the book she was reading before they set off on their mission about how a blue moon was rare and represented betrayal. He shuddered at how correct that symbolism was. Chiya Tsukino needed to go down, and he told them such. But when he was asked exactly why Jiro was taken, the blonde hesitated, and for good reason. He had already agreed to himself that he would not tell his teammates about the special ingredients in the pies that all of them ate. He unconsciously gripped the fabric over his stomach and scowled. "I don't think you should know," replied Naruto when Sasuke started to prod him for information. Sakura only grew more worried at his resistance. "And why not?" questioned the raven-haired genin. "It's part of the mission, isn't it? We should know." The Jinchuriki closed his eyes and bowed his head. Thoughts of the pies and the song and the ominous music of the koto floated in and out of his head. Kakashi's face and his warning popped up and he fingered the sleeves of his jacket, his facial expression solemn. "It's better to know the truth first than it is to hide it," he thought to himself. He remembered how it was to figure out that he contained the Kyuubi within him after years of thinking he was simply a normal human being. A quick flash of another dreamlike notion hit him, and he thought about how it could have been worse to find out if he had been older because it would make less sense as to why people held it off as he would have had more time to think that he was simply ordinary. He made the decision. "The pie," Naruto uttered slowly. "Chiya wants to use Jiro as," he bit his lip in anticipation. He did not dare to look up to see their reactions. "Ingredients." When he heard the telltale horrified gasps, he hoped that Ichiro had not heard as well. He heard Sakura retch particularly loud and she coughed and he did not want to see it. The hand on his stomach clenched tighter and he felt bile rise to his throat, but for the sake of the mission, he was able to keep it down. Sasuke was not doing much better and he knew it. "Oh, okay," gulped the Uchiha. "So that means that yeah," sighed Naruto resignedly, "we did." He looked up with a fire in his eyes right after. "But we won't do it again and we won't let her do it again." The trio tried to contain themselves and they were so concentrated that they did not notice how the civilians in their caravan were already fast asleep yet again. Naruto was keeping one eye on them, though. They were their responsibility until Kakashi came back with Jiro. That was when they could finally rest. "We already called for reinforcements." "That's good," stuttered Sakura. Her face was pale and her hands were trembling. Naruto looked downward and wanted to change the subject. Without a second thought, he explained his findings on the seal on Jiro's tongue and how he should be testing something out while they waited, so he unsealed a bowl from his sealing scroll pack, watching how it clinked on the ground metallically. The other two watched as he took his leftover water from his canteen and poured it into the container. He let out a breath. He let them know that he did not really know what he was doing and that he was acting on a hunch, but it was all that they got so far. He had never created a seal that could be activated through a liquid before. But he knew it was possible. Seals were very malleable, as his mother and father did not fail to tell him over and over again. Almost anything could be possible with them if you were creative enough. Plus, his mom had taken him to the Uzumaki shrine just outside Konoha before to show him the long-lost family heirlooms and all the hidden-away scrolls of seals and sealing techniques that were all unique to the Uzumaki clan before they were wiped out in a great war decades previously. There was one thing that really distinguished any kind of seal from the Uzumaki-designed ones, and that was the Uzumaki swirl symbol. Every single seal created by the clan had that somewhere on the seal design and none of the others did, mainly because all designs from the clan were specifically geared around the stability of the swirl. It represented power in sealing and made the seal have the ability to last longer with less chakra. In fact, the seal that his father had used to place the fox inside him had the same swirl because it was made by his mother's family. However, each seal was so unique by that particular symbol because only an Uzumaki or those specifically trained by an Uzumaki could make a scheme with it. If you were not taught properly, just one mess up with coming up with a seal and the incorporation of the traditional swirl could literally backfire on you. So this was why Jiro's seal had to be an Uzumaki one, and most likely from the shrine because no place else had any more information on the clan, not even their original hidden village of Uzushio. It was carefully guarded by the hidden leaf. The evidence made Naruto come to the conclusion that the person who got the design must have stolen it from Konoha. There was no other explanation. There were few Uzumakis around anymore, and none of them would be willing to teach a non-clan member their ways unless they married them, which was the case with his dad, or if they trusted them so much that they were willing to die for them. Naruto's teammates watched as he opened a ragged-looking leather-bound journal. Its pages were covered in numerous notes consisting of seals and ideas for seals, and their ingenuity probably stemmed from Naruto being a prankster. Sakura knew that Naruto was talented in seals, but she was surprised when she saw just how into it he got. Sasuke nodded in approval, as he knew very well that if there was one that his best friend had a natural talent with, and with the help of Kushina, it was seal work. It was the one thing that Naruto never really had prominent problems with because everything else he learned by doing it with his body. Sasuke thought that it was probably a family thing. The blonde took out an inkpot and wet the powdered ink inside it with water. Then he dipped a brush that was apparently in his weapon's pouch and painted a sketch of something onto a blank page. Naruto let them know that that was what he could remember of Jiro's seal. The drawing was messy and was missing a lot of details, but it got the skeleton down from the oval shape to the swirl on one of its ends. Naruto felt the night pounding down on him. The pressure was building up from his middle. If he did not have something right by the time Kakashi and I came back with their client, they would be in trouble. He thought of the basic ways to reverse an Uzumaki seal and went for that. "You think I should put the water symbol here?" he asked Sakura and she nodded in agreement when he pointed to an area on the paper that was near to the right of the oval. "Gotcha." He scribbled a swirl that he knew would turn counterclockwise instead of clockwise in hopes that he could reverse the effects of the mind control. He bit his lip again and Sasuke and Sakura watched as he ripped the sheet of paper from the notebook and placed it on top of the metal bowl. Naruto formed a series of hand seals, hoping against hope that it would be the correct set, and then he touched his fingers onto the piece of paper. Seconds passed and the drawing glowed blue. The ink started to fade and seemed to sink from the paper into the water below it until it dissolved in a miniature whirlpool. The liquid turned black for a moment and then turned clear once again. Naruto sighed in relief. Maybe he did something right. But he wouldn't know until he got Jiro to drink it. He took the bowl and carefully poured all of it back into his canteen for storage, noting to himself to not drink from it or let anyone else drink from it either. The group huddled together afterwards, worried and scared. The energy that was fueling their actions had faded off with the time that they waited and waited, so they focused on guarding over Ichiro and his family's servant corps. None of them could sleep, so they did not bother announcing shifts. For a while they took to the quiet and the fighting that Naruto had just exited not too long ago fled from his memory at least for that long. In fact, if they did not already feel so sick at the revelations of that evening, one could call that night peaceful. Too bad it wasn't. Naruto felt like he was in a daze for a while. The night was finally lulling him to sleep. He rocked back and forth and did not notice when Sasuke stood up stiffly, an uneasy look in his eyes. Kakashi-sensei, called the Uchiha. Naruto and Sakura perked up at the words. Running the road was the lone figure of Kakashi. He was stumbling down the grass with a lump over his shoulder that could be none other than Jiro himself. He was huffing and looked disheveled. His headband was up and his bad eye was closed. The team knew then that their teacher had been forced to use his implanted Sharingan. That was most certainly not a good sign. In seconds he was in front of them and he carefully propped up Jiro's unresponsive body against the Oda road marker. The reinforcements we called for arrived and they're holding them back for now, breathed Kakashi. There were scratches all over his uniform. It seemed like it was a one-sided battle. But we need to run, he commanded, now. Let's get to Miya as soon as possible. What? Why? Wondered Naruto. Remember the weird seals on Chia's neck? The Hatake inquired breathlessly. The blonde nodded. All of them have it, and it's no ordinary seal. It makes the user 10 times more powerful, and with a bloodline limit like that, if I'm right, we need to report this to the Hokage, and that means that you were right about someone stealing the Uzumaki seal because most likely someone did. And that someone is dangerous. Only a ninja that's Kage level could take him on and hope to defeat him. Sasuke crinkled his eyebrows together hurriedly. Who is it? Kakashi stared at his team earnestly. Orochimaru is interfering in rice paddies. Write the message, Naruto. He gestured wildly and the teacher turned to wake the civilians nearby. Sakura and Sasuke quickly got Naruto's permission to make Jiro drink the liquid seal after some fast-paced instructions from the blonde, and he handed over his canteen. Everything was happening so fast. He did not have to think as he wrote a quick note to the Hokage Tower for the second time that night on the last piece of paper. Orochimaru has followers in rice paddies. He flexed his chakra while the message vanished, and he knew that this would alarm the fourth to no end. There would be no stop to the investigations. The traitor Sannin had not been seen nor heard from since before Minato had taken the hat and the leaf had failed to capture him. They needed to end the mission right then, otherwise there would be trouble. They were in over their heads. The hair on the back of his arm stood on end when there was howling in the distance. It seemed like the reinforcements were not holding them off for long. Damn it, shouted Kakashi. Let's go. Is Jiro awake yet? At the question, Sakura sent him a thumbs up. In the back, Jiro stirred a bit and looked utterly confused and terrified as he leaned on the signpost. It seemed that the counter seal worked after all. At least they had that much luck on their side. Thundering footsteps could be heard suddenly and the group quickly got ready to be on the move again. The genin created a formation around their clients and Jiro was being held up by one of the servants. Both brothers did not look like they were faring well, but it could not be helped. Naruto and his teammates held up their kunai, but Sakura was shaking like a leaf. She didn't have time to be scared. She had to suppress it. He wished he could tell her that, but by then it was already too late. If at all possible, more of the humanoid creatures were coming in a horde from the direction of Saga. Luckily, the normal dogs were gone. It looked like he and Kakashi had defeated them all. However, the hybrids that were left behind were glowing and overflowing with chakra. Naruto could feel it even if they were about half a kilometer away. The orange light from their neck seals burned in the black of night, and the team and those they were protecting braced themselves. Kakashi stood tall in front of all of them, prepared to defend. Then, they could heard yelling and war calls. Clashes later, and they realized that the leaf reinforcements had followed the animal humans all the way to their spot, though Chie and her brethren were hell-bent of killing Jiro. Asuma Sarutobi appeared out of thin air beside Kakashi. A grim look settled upon him. "You were lucky I had a team out on a completed A-rank mission nearby, otherwise you guys would be dead meat." None of Team 7 laughed at the bearded Jounin's dark humor. "It's me and 3 other Chunin out here, but with the looks of things, we might need all the manpower we've got. A Chunin could easily defeat one of those crazy bastards, but 10? You've got to be kidding me. These things are having their powers enhanced by that traitor's Heaven Seal." The words Heaven Seal brought a wave of fresh dreamlike thoughts onto Naruto. Had he seen it before? For a moment he was watching a dark-haired Uchiha laugh insanely, and wings were spreading out from his back that looked like purpling hands, and the scara in his eyes was black and the irises were yellow, and there was water and a waterfall, and what the hell? Naruto asked out loud. Sasuke stared at him questioningly, but no one else paid it heed. He shook his head in order to make the weird visions go away. In no time, the Tsukino clan hybrids that chased them from the village were so close that they could feel their fighting breaths. With Asuma and Kakashi being the only 2 Jounin with them, they relied on them to make the most movements. The genin were to mainly watch over the clients, who were trembling in fright by then. The 3 Chunin were still clashing with the lycanthropes, and one of them spun and sliced one across its chest. Blood spouted out, but it turned out that it was only a graze. The Chunin rolled over when the creature stomped at the spot he was at before. "Fire style, Phoenix Sage," bellowed Sasuke when one of the wolf things got too close. The fire surged out from his lips in tiny balls and burned the grass tips to charred remains, and the creature was momentarily deterred from attempting to attack the circle of genin with their clients in the middle. "Damn it!" Sasuke hissed. "They're too fast. I can barely see them dodge." "I know. We had the same problem before," boomed Naruto as a reply. "They move like they're possessed. Shit, this is really bad." The genin moved closer to their clients, and Naruto felt Ichiro and Jiro quaking in their clothes. Ichiro was practically biting his nails. And with the civilians totally defenseless with a mere trio of genin around to keep them safe, they really could not go anywhere. All they could really do was keep close and hope for the best, but the best looked like choosing from being clawed out by crazed she-wolf number 1, or being gnawed on by psychotic man-wolf number 2. No one really liked their choices. Asuma and Kakashi were the perfect tag team. While Asuma was particularly skilled in using chakra blades, Kakashi was skilling in scaring the opponent with his copying and usage of ninjutsu. The 2 twirled around each other in a perpetual dance, avoiding attacks and creating openings. The Sarutobi lunged at Chie, who was snarling and baring her fangs. Wind chakra engulfed his blades as he got closer in hopes of making her back into their trap. The edges became sharper, and Kakashi came up behind the woman. Ox, rabbit, monkey, and Kakashi's lighting came to life in a more concentrated form than what Naruto witnessed from before. The crackles of electricity were bluer, and he charged forward without the woman knowing. Steps away from her, he called out the technique, Raikiri, and the element pierced through the air with multiple wisps. They heard a scream. Out of the light came an unharmed Tsukino. The jutsu did not touch her at all. Instead, the ground on which she stood was completely obliterated. It was impossible. She could not have had the time to dodge that quickly. Everyone who watched knew it. The two jounin should have had the upper hand. But something wasn't right. In the dust cloud, there was an orange glow. It was stronger and more vibrant this time. Around the group there was a similar phenomenon occurring at the same moment. Even though the enemy forces were cut into half of what they started out as when they came down from Saga, it did not make sense that there was so much malevolent chakra permeating the night. It felt oppressive. Sakura fell to her knees and the civilians all but collapsed. Naruto was used to being around such power. He was the Jinchuriki after all, but Sasuke was not doing much better than the girl on the team was at the moment. When the smoke fully cleared, they could see the forms of all 5 remaining shape-shifters and realized that all of them were trembling. But Naruto of all people knew that this kind of trembling was not the kind that meant fear. This kind meant power of an unbelievable kind. He had felt it before himself. The earth seemed to rumble and all around Genin, Jounin, and Chunin, the lycanthropes grinned with their pointed teeth, as if they could not quite contain their humor. Chiya especially led the goings-on. Naruto felt a shudder run down his spine as she turned to their group specifically. "You little brats thought you could get away with my prey," her voice sneered at them in its abnormal double tone. "But you thought wrong and I'm going to prove it to you." She raised her claws which seemed sharper than before. Black markings swam across her fur, but she was acting as if the event was normal. Her irises were glowing yellow now and the scara behind them was pitch black. If anyone had to guess, this was a monstrous transformation. She pointed her claws towards the genin and Naruto's eyes widened. "No," he whispered, but it was too late. Her nails shot out like bullets and the projectiles spun in the winds madly. They were headed straight toward them, and Naruto only did what he could. Multi-shadow clone, the blonde belted and at least 50 copies of himself puffed into existence. They popped rapidly when the nails hit them, blocking them from the real Naruto and the others nearest to him. But one was headed straight for Jiro and Naruto knew that the woman still recalled her quest to hunt for meat for her next dish. The clones could not get to the middle of the circle in time, so the boy himself jumped in front of the teenager, hoping to brush it away with his kunai knife. He grunted as he slashed it aside and parts of the group fell on top of one another. He winced when he realized that he could not block it all the way. The bullet-like weapon grazed the back of his throwing hand. Naruto had collapsed on top of Jiro who was shouting and Sasuke had leapt in front of them to defend with his jutsu. He heard another fire technique being summoned up with a blast of chakra and the heat of it brushed against their skin until he heard another thud that meant the attack may have been somewhat successful. The outrageous laughter made him think otherwise. The Namikaze's stomach dropped when the edges of the small wound on his hand started to turn green in a matter of seconds. He had forgotten that they were poisoned. "Crap!" Naruto gasped out. The scratch was starting to sting. If he did not treat it soon, then he would eventually start to feel dizzy. Who knew how much time he had left? If he didn't hurry, he could very well die. "You're poisoned," he briefly heard Sakura shout and Sasuke started to panic, but Naruto thought quickly. He healed at a relatively fast rate anyway. He could get it out without much of a problem. It was reckless of him to do so, of course, but it would get rid of the injury in the short term. So, he stuck the kunai in his hand into the wound and dug into it, much to the horror of his teammates. He flicked out the blood and the bit of flesh that was affected and he quickly unraveled a swath of bandages from his pouch with his teeth as he rolled it round the afflicted area. For that time, he thought about how he felt a sense of déjà vu. Had something like this happened before? The memory was fleeting and involved some sort of mission with brothers that worked for hire and a drunk man that may or may have not built some bridge at some unknown place. The thought itched at the back of his mind, but he wanted to stop thinking about it, so he forced himself to do so. It must have been from some weird dream or something. When you find yourself surrounded by dirt, it's time to stop digging, Chia's voice rang out. Right, they were still in the middle of a battle. Naruto looked up, and instead of just Sasuke and Sakura surrounding the perimeter to defend, the Jounin had deftly backed up against them as well, completely aware that right now they were kind of disoriented. The three Chunin were working on fighting off two of the Tsukino, and the group that the Genin and Jounin were in was currently enclosed by three of them, including the leader. They tiptoed around them, snarls on their maws. Kakashi and Asuma kept their guard up. The genin and civilians could not do much at that moment, and Naruto wished he knew more offensive sealing like his mother did, and how he longed to be a master of his father's flying thunder god technique. However, right now they were not sure what was going to happen. All they could do was wait. They were trapped in a rock in a hard place. When Chia's already wide grin grew, he knew they were in trouble. Secret technique, the Tsukino ninja yelled, Tsukikage Senkaku. 2. If at all possible, the Jounin and Genin pressed closer together to the civilians, trying to protect their clients from damage and willing to take it on themselves. Unfortunately, the Chunin were still rather busy at the moment to realize that their team captain was probably in deep trouble. A white light in the shape of a triangle appeared, and at each point was a Tsukino ninja. It rapidly shrunk until the triangle was like a gigantic ethereal rope around them, squeezing them further together. Luckily for the clients, they barely felt anything at all, but the leaf nin did. And boy was it painful. The edges of the shape burned and sizzled into their forearms. Sakura screamed, and Naruto tried to use his kunai to slice through it or push it off of him, but nothing was cutting through it. The others struggled and wiggled, and he saw that the teachers were trying to come up with a counter-strategy that would not hurt the nearby bystanders, especially those trapped behind them. It was no simple task. But then an idea zoomed inside Naruto's head. The triangle cut into his jacket sleeve, and it threatened to get even closer. "Don't move," ordered Asuma. The man thought that maybe struggling was causing it to come closer. Naruto forced his arm into his weapon's pouch with a lot of effort, even though a fairly sizable cut through his sleeve was the effect. Blood oozed out, but he knew he did not have time to think of that. Everyone was getting cut. If only he could get this right, damn it. Something metal looped around the finger in his pouch. He felt a little further on the handle to check if it was the correct one, and when he felt the familiar coarse paper against his fingertips, he smirked quietly to himself. He did not want to let the enemy know what he was doing. It was best if it came out as a surprise, even if his teammates were also unaware. Discreetly, he took the finger looped around the handle and jabbed the three-pronged kunai away from himself, even though his limbs were greatly restricted at the moment. The weapon only flew about a foot away from the triangular constraints and from where the entire trapped group was forced to stand, but it was all he needed. For a millisecond one of the enemies glanced at the stuck kunai, confusion and then sudden recognition lit on his face, but by then it was too late. Concentrate on the destination rather than the seal on the handle, the blonde told himself. Then there was a yellow flash. He did not make it all the way to the kunai, only halfway there, just like when he was practicing with his dad on the training grounds not too long ago. A part of him was frustrated with himself that he could not get it right at such a crucial situation, but the other part of him was leaping for joy. For all intents and purposes, just getting 6 inches out of the triangle trap was enough. He had teleported out of it and he was free to attack. Naruto sprinted forward, much to the surprise of everyone in the clearing, and he lunged at the man that had spotted the kunai before, opting for a more brawler-like collision. The lycanthrope was so caught off guard that he did not have time to get out of the way just as Naruto slammed into him full force. The Tsukino lost his concentration and the triangle broke apart like glass. Naruto smashed his elbow into the guy's neck, hoping to crush the windpipe, but all he got as a result was a minor bout of coughing. They struggled for a bit and Naruto elbowed him again in the neck and clasped his knees around the torso. The boy made quick hand signs, remembering one of the few trap seals his mother had taught him so far. Uzumaki style, binding seal, he boomed, and out from his hands came a black snake-like rope with the original Uzumaki swirls embedded into it. As the man clutched at his neck, so did the ropes, and so Naruto leapt off in haste. How does it feel like to be trapped in now, bastard? He fumed, then turned away to the rest of the battle after he stooped down to yank his father's kunai out the ground. Sakura was now running away from the fight with the civilians and was directing them down the road in a direction that Naruto guessed was towards Mia. His best friend was crouched before the cowering group with a fierce look in his eye, and then he turned to run after them as well. As soon as Naruto saw them, he went to follow. Meters away from catching up, he skidded backwards when a plain Chunin with short cropped brown hair and a Tsukino enemy clashed right before him. Knives clang and he put up his own tri-pronged one to deflect any incoming blows. It turned out that was not needed. The Chunin performed an effortless backflip and sprung to his feet until he ducked the creature's clawed hand. He used his momentum to jump forward, twist his body skillfully, and he landed in a one-armed handstand while he balanced on the enemy's free shoulder. He turned in the air again until he used his legs to kick at the back of his opponent, who lurched forward in anticipation. The luck ended there, however. The Tsukino aimed his claws at the Chunin and Naruto knew what was about to happen. Chunin-san, warned Naruto to the fellow leaf ninja who caught the signal, and he whipped out a paper bomb that was attached to a kunai and threw it at the enemy's solar plexus. Before it hit, it was swatted away and into the ground further away where it exploded and sizzled into non-existence. But the guy was thankfully distracted enough for the Chunin to do something. He did a few hand signs and shouted, "Earth style, mud swamp." The ground beneath the lycanthrope crumbled away until it was wet and he sank there to his knees. Suddenly, ninja wire shot out from nowhere and past Naruto's ear. Attached to it was a shuriken which was leading the wire around the body of the trapped adversary. When it made its way around the man, electricity coursed through the metal wire and shocked him. The man was disoriented moments later, but his guttural protesting noises signified that it would not be for long at all. When Naruto and the Chunin turned to see who had done this, Naruto was not surprised to see Sasuke panting with his arm outstretched and Sakura and the rest of the troop long gone. "Thanks, Sasuke," marveled the blonde. He received a nod in response. The Chunin walked closer to them, a commanding aura surround his body. "We need a plan to take this one out," the man informed earnestly. "Before it only took one of us Chunin to defeat one, but either we're getting much slower, or they're getting faster and more resilient. It's like their skin is made of diamond or they keep regenerating. Either way, this guy isn't going to stay incapacitated for long." Sasuke was quick to agree. "Right, I noticed it too. It has something to do with those seals. They're like chakra steroids," added Naruto. The group sighed in resignation when the thought was deemed as absolutely true. It was more than lucky that they had two Juin with them. The Chunin stared at the recovering enemy with concentration. He tapped his chin and then glimpsed back at his genin counterparts. "These guys are fast, but they're big targets," he trailed off. Naruto and Sasuke glanced at each other and smirked at an idea that they were sure to have come up with at the same exact time as soon as the Chunin hinted at it. They immediately explained that meant they probably needed a grand and powerful attack. Sasuke had two affinities thanks to his Uchiha genes, so that meant that he was a fire specialist. On the other hand, Naruto had the affinity for wind and his dad managed to teach him one simple wind-style technique after he finally finished wind training, but one push from the air would be all that was needed. The Chunin agreed that he would execute a genjutsu to distract their foe for a while and he performed the hand signs as soon as the Tsukino snapped out of his stupor and struggled to break from his earthen constraints. Megan, Kokonia Reizu no Jutsu. 3. Naruto could not see the effects of the jutsu, but he knew that the guy would be seeing something weird with his surroundings if he noticed it. They did not have that kind of time though. He gestured to the Uchiha. "Fire style, great fireball," exclaimed Sasuke. Tiger, ox, dog, rabbit, snake, and Naruto made his signs, shouting, "Wind release, Detapa." A great gale of wind billowed after his friend's fire. The fireball, which was already so large, grew in size after being fed so much oxygen by the wind pulsing behind it. The techniques combined and clashed against one another, working in perfect harmony as the genjutsu kept the man distracted. There was a great flash of light and explosions, and they knew they finally hit their target this time. They covered their faces with their arms and huffed behind the heat, waiting for the end result. The lycanthrope had burned to normal size and his mouth was wide open and his arms flung backward. His legs were still partially stuck in the mud, but what really surprised them was that even though he very well should have been dead considering that he was hit directly with a blow that enormous, and the fact that most of his canine features were seemingly gone, he was still breathing. His skin was pink and steaming and he was still breathing. They were in shock, but they kept their guard up. The man twitched and they thought that he was going to attack them, but then he started twitching violently. The black markings on his neck snaked up around his body like a glorified noose. He started choking as soon as the seal turned from orange to red to purple and glowed so brightly it hurt. The man spit out a mixture of blood and saliva and his chest caved in on itself and his eyes rolled back into their sockets, white and blank. All his muscles started to spasm and the seal appeared to have been squeezing him all the tighter until he could not move or breathe anymore. In that moment, the man choked and died, collapsing on his knees with his head forever looking up into the moon. His arms dropped limply to the sides and he stayed there as if begging to be saved, but nothing could be done. One thing was for certain, they did not kill the man. The seal did. The seal malfunctioned. It rejected him. That was Sasuke started. "We need to check on the others," said the Chunin instead. They got up and sprinted up the hill and the two Chunin left were soundly knocked out by some unknown force. One of them had a tanto loosely gripped in his hand and covered in red. A look at them and they were grateful that they were only unconscious. The Tsukino Naruto had trapped in a seal was unconscious as well. It seemed that he could not break out, and that meant that 2 of the last 5 were definitely taken care of. But when they really looked, the Chunin had taken out 2 of the others as well. The body of an enemy was decapitated and his head was nowhere to be found, which the other was pinned up against a tree with what looked like Asuma's wind chakra blades. It was not clear whether that particular foe was still alive and kicking. However, the Jounin were left in a furious battle with the last Tsukino standing, and that was Chie. If at all possible, she stood taller than before. Her fur was blacker and the seal seemed to have caused her to grow horns on her head. Her growling made her appear more animal than human. There was no reasoning with her anymore. Unfortunately, she noticed the group that had come to back Kakashi and Asuma up. She lunged at them at lightning speed. No one saw her coming. All 3 of the new arrivals were cocked backwards and they grunted at the impact. If they thought she was fast before, that was nothing. Naruto literally could not see her move. It was like she was using the Hiraishin. It was like she was teleporting instead of stepping or running. They were in huge trouble. "Naruto!" "Sasuke!" called Kakashi worriedly. Asuma came up from behind. In a second, they too were knocked backward by the unseen force of Chie Tsukino. In response, Kakashi opened his Sharingan eye fully, hoping to copy her movements. But she was not interested in them, she was interested in the children on the other side. Kakashi flashed after her, seeing her move. "I told you not to interfere," the woman screeched. "I told you. Now look what you have made me do." And she stomped forward and swiped her legs outward until the Genin and Chunin who were just getting up were pushed back against the road again. "No!" yelled the Hatake. "Chidori!" And lighting came to life. He went to slice her, but she dodged and he only was able to injure one of her arms. She screamed louder and the seal burned red. The Genin got up along with the Chunin. Kakashi's hand was still pulsing with electricity and Asuma ready to stance. Chie started to laugh her trademark laugh again. But this time, there was no more talking. She prepped herself and Kakashi was about to see what she was doing, but he had already used his eye too long. He tipped a bit to the side and shut it after wincing. Asuma looked concernedly to his friend. But now, Without a Sharingan eye that could be properly used, they might as well have been dead. Shia left her preparation and started running and running until she was all but a blur around them in an enclosed circle. The Jounin were trapped outside and they could not do much at the moment. Naruto knew that his teacher felt useless and frustrated at the moment. He would too if that were him waiting on the outside and being forced to watch. A jab came and Naruto yelped in pain as he slammed into the Chunin, who luckily caught him. Another jab and the Chunin fell as he clutched Naruto. Nice purpling bruises started to form on their torsos. Another blur and Sasuke flew into the two others as well. Sasuke tried to throw another ninja wire to no avail. He was met with another hit and he clutched his arm with a grimace. Naruto started to make hand seals and was knocked back yet again. They even caught a glimpse of how Asuma tried a wind technique that was easily blown away. It was like they were trapped in a vortex of never-ending energy and it was invisible. It all seemed so fruitless. They did not know what to do. What could they do? Screw this, bellowed Naruto, and he swiftly made 10 clone pop into action. All of them popped at once, but Sasuke gasped out loud. Naruto, he informed hurriedly, she slowed down, ARGH. Another invisible punch sent a pain into his shoulder. What? Asked the Namikes. Just keep doing that. Ugh. Another hit. And so Naruto kept attempting make clones and they kept puffing away. He did not understand where this was going or why Sasuke kept informing him that she was somehow slowing down every time she popped that many clones. He guessed it made sense that someone would naturally slow down when they wanted to beat the shit out of someone, but he could not really see the difference. A distant memory, or was it a memory, hit him like a ton of bricks. Something to do with mirrors and a young boy with a bloodline limit and how he was too fast for them, then it was gone like a light bulb that flicked off before bedtime. He pulled his fingers in a ram seal and his arms were pulsing with painful contusions. 10 more copies of himself popped. There! Sasuke exclaimed, and for some reason the boy went for it. He dived for a particular spot in the circular vortex and stopped it. I got you, the raven smiled with huffs. Chiyo was pinned with a chalked expression on her face. You can't hit us anymore. I figured you out. You slow down when you hit us by a lot. I can see it. Wah, the woman angrily breathed. That's impossible. Even then you shouldn't be able to see it. Then, Naruto heard her voice quake, which was a first in all the time she had been beating them senseless. Why, your eyes. An Uchiha. What are you? And Sasuke grunted as he was shoved off and he rolled to his side. His face said he was confused. But when Naruto was able to pull himself together and see what had happened, he too was in shock. His best friend's irises, which were normally pitch black, were red. Bright red. A single tomo shape was near the pupil in each eye. It was then that Naruto knew that Sasuke had made his full initiation into the Uchiha clan. He had only seen eyes like those on other Uchihas, including Sasuke's parents and brother when they went on police patrols around the village. He grinned and offered up a hand. The raven took it. The Sharingan. Naruto beamed, despite the situation. What? Huffed his companion. You awakened it. After that, the expression on Sasuke's face changed from one of confusion to one of wonder. They quickly turned to see Chiya, who was trembling in anger and fury, more so than before. Her fangs were coming out and visibly growing. The seal turned purple as opposed to the red from before. Of course, they should have known. The best way to counter a bloodline limit was with another bloodline limit. Sasuke put on a braver face, as if he was more ready for her than he ever was, which was most likely true. She opened her mouth and roared. Kakashi and Asuma appeared next to them, and so did the Chunin. The moon encircled her head like a halo, the fur on her skin glowing bright. Her eyes were wild and possessed. She crouched and was about to pounce like a true predator wolf. Then, the same thing from before happened. She had used too much power and for too long. The strange seal on her neck rejected her. It clasped tightly around her neck, choking her, straining her, making her eyeballs bulge out. Tears leaked out and ran down her cheeks in sad trails. She started to sob as she clawed at her neck and blood tricked from the claw marks and the inside of her lips. Why? She cried and Naruto almost felt bad for her. The light of the moon shone on her wet cheeks. I just wanted to keep him alive. Wanted to make our pies the best. To keep his memory. Thought you would help me, Orochimaru-sama. At the sound of such a name the leaf shinobi all tensed. I just wanted you to bring him back to me. Why? Why? Loved Himak. And then she stopped struggling for air. The hands on her neck dropped lifelessly and she sank to her knees, and then the rest of her came after in a soft thud. The nails and hair retracted back into their rightful place as if they had never been there in the first place. A single lock of hair fell gracefully on her face. Chiya was beautiful again with her heart-shaped face and that single mole under her eye. Her dark eyes were still shiny with tears and they kept coming down her nose even as her head hit the ground. Her lips parted ever so slightly, pink and full, lips that anyone would admit were gentle, lips not meant for shouting profanities or curses at innocent people. And Naruto knew deep in his heart that Chiya must have been a good person before. The blue moon lit up the road. Kakashi asked Asuma to send a short message to the Hokage to report to the rice paddies daimyo that Saga village was corrupt. The stars twinkled in the nighttime sky, but none of them stopped to admire their work nor the people that were forced to lose their lives that night. They turned their backs on them, leaving everything behind, vowing to understand why a traitorous ninja like Orochimaru would want to destroy the lives of the desperate people he encroached upon. There was mournful howling in the distance. Their return trek to Mia was a quick one, mostly because of theirs and the client's hasty desire to return home. Asuma and his team split away from Team 7 in order to report their own original mission success and about the botched kidnapping during the length of a C rank mission. Mr. Ueda paid Team 7 a hefty price, including a huge tip when Ichiro and Jiro went on their knees and begged him to do so, surprising the man who only laughed it off. The two brothers apologized profusely for their behavior and thanked them 100 times over with a lot of bowing and nervous hilarity. It only got worse when they figured out that Sasuke was an Uchiha and that Naruto was the fourth son. The two boys were so embarrassed when Kakashi seriously revealed that information. They both thought that the man was not one to talk about such things so needlessly, but it was later explained to them by Sakura that she thought that their teacher was actually very pissed that Ichiro was blaming them for that mess before they went and saved Jiro, especially when his young students could have lost their lives too. He wanted payback in the form of retribution. They took 2 more days to return to Konoha, tired and healing. Naruto's injuries were all but gone by then, though. Sasuke passed his brother on the way to the tower after checking into the village and notified him that he had awakened his Sharingan. When Itachi asked, "Wait, but you were only on a C-rank mission, right?" then he and the team bolted off faster without a word. They knew that Itachi was already overprotective enough. The poor guy was probably so suspicious that it would give him a brotherly heart attack. Kakashi opened the door to the Hokage's office within minutes and the 3 genin stood behind him at attention. Team 7, reporting from a successful C-rank mission, Hokage-sensei. Naruto and Sasuke snickered at the nickname. It was then that Naruto felt a pulsing, flaming annoyance behind his father's desk. Dread sat on his shoulders like a heavy raincoat. The back of the high chair was to them, but it soon swiveled around to reveal a fuming Kushina. "You think that this is funny, Tebane?" Naruto sank into himself. His father flashed suddenly in front of his desk and reprimanded his wife for taking a Hokage's place while he had gone to the bathroom and tried to placate her when she rounded on him as well. "Our families are going to kill us, right?" the blonde asked tearfully to Sasuke and they sighed together as a team in a uniform motion. For some reason, the thought of having a family to yell at him for something like being worried about him for a mission gone wrong at all hit Naruto hard in the heart. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and share. Want early audio-only versions? Join me on Patreon, link in description. I'm Fox Sage. See you next time.